It was a cold morning in San Diego when Rachel Matthews parked her blue sedan in front of the house she had shared with her husband for 3 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the conversation she knew she would have to face as soon as she stepped through that door. She had just returned from a 6-month tour of duty in the Middle East, serving as a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy. And throughout the flight back, Marcus's parting word echoed in her mind like a persistent hammer. "When you get back, we need to have a serious talk about your future in the Navy," he had said via video call 2 weeks earlier, his voice thick with barely disguised frustration. "This isn't working for us, Rachel. I need a wife at home, not a soldier on the other side of the world." Rachel took a deep breath and finally got out of the car. The house looked the same, with its well-kept garden and the porch where they used to have coffee on Sunday mornings, but something fundamental had changed. She could feel it. Marcus opened the door before she even rang the bell, as if he had been waiting there the whole time. He was thinner, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, but his eyes held that determination Rachel knew so well. It was the same expression he wore when making decisions he considered final. "Welcome home," he said, without apparent emotion, picking up one of his suitcases. The coldness in his tone cut deeper than Rachel had expected. They entered in silence, and she immediately noticed the subtle changes in the decor. The photos of them together had been moved or removed. The house felt more like his than theirs. Marcus made coffee while Rachel settled on the living room sofa, still wearing her travel uniform. She was exhausted, but she knew that postponing this conversation would only make things harder. "So, have you thought about what I said?" Marcus asked, handing her a cup and sitting in the opposite armchair, maintaining a physical distance that seemed to symbolize the emotional chasm between. Rachel held the warm cup in her hand, seeking comfort in the warmth. "I've thought a lot about it, but Marcus, the Navy isn't just a job for me. It's who I am. It's my purpose." He sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair in a way that indicated he had rehearsed this moment many times. "Rachel, I've supported you for 5 years. 5 years watching you leave, spending holidays alone, explaining to my family why my wife is never around. I did my part. Now it's your turn to do yours. You either choose our family or you choose this career. You can't have both anymore." His words hurt because they carried a partial truth that Rachel couldn't deny. She had missed birthdays, Christmases, important moments, but she had also saved lives, made a difference, served something greater than herself. How could she explain that to someone who had never felt that calling? "I understand your frustration, I really do," Rachel began, choosing each word carefully. "But you knew who I was when we got married. I was already in the Navy. I never hid that from you." Marcus stood up abruptly, his frustration finally overflowing. "I thought it was just a phase. I thought you'd take your time and then move on, build a real life with us. But you keep renewing your contract, accepting increasingly dangerous missions, putting strangers before your own family." His voice rose, and Rachel felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I don't put strangers before you," she replied, her own voice trembling. "I serve my country. There's a difference." Marcus laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "There's no difference when the result is the same. An empty chair at the dinner table, an empty bed every night, an empty life for me." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was calmer, but also colder. "I've made my decision, Rachel. Either you hand in your resignation letter, or I hand in the divorce paper. You have 2 weeks to decide." Rachel felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Divorce. The word hung in the air between them like a sentence. She loved Marcus, or at least she loved the man he had been, the man who supported her, who was proud when she received promotions, who understood that serving was an essential part of who she was. When had that man disappeared? Or had he always been there, just waiting for the right moment to appear? That night, Rachel barely slept. Marcus had gone to the guest room, establishing a physical separation that mirrored the emotional one. She lay in the bed they had once shared, staring at the ceiling, reliving the last 6 months. The mission had been difficult, perhaps the most challenging of her career. She commanded a medical team at a forward base, treating both American soldiers and local civilians wounded in the conflict. The conditions were brutal, resources limited, and each day brought new, impossible challenges. But she had made a difference. She knew she had. There was a little girl, no more than 8 years old, who arrived at the base with shrapnel from a grenade in her abdomen. Everyone said she wouldn't survive, that they should focus on the cases with the best chances. But Rachel refused to give up. She worked for 12 straight hours using techniques she had learned in advanced training, improvising when necessary. The girl survived. Her parents wept with gratitude, calling Rachel an angel. How could she give up on them? How could she abandon the ability to save lives because of an ultimatum? The following days were a silent. Marcus barely spoke to her, communicating only through notes and short messages. Rachel tried to talk again, tried to find a middle ground, but he was inflexible. It was all or... She sought counseling with a military therapist, participated in support groups for military couples, but nothing seemed capable. Breaking through the barrier Marcus had erected, she began to seriously consider resigning, imagining what civilian life would be like. She could work in a hospital, use her medical skills in other ways, but whenever she tried to imagine herself in that life, she felt a deep emptiness, as if she were betraying herself. Then the summons arrived, an official letter from the Navy requesting her presence at a special ceremony at the San Diego Naval Base. Rachel frowned as she read, "Not understanding its purpose." There was no mention of work or a new mission, just a date and time, and a note at the end stating that spouses were welcome and encouraged to attend. She showed the letter to Marcus during dinner, one of the few meals they still shared together. "They say you can come with me," she offered, trying to keep her voice neutral. "It might be good for you to see what I do, to understand better." Marcus looked at the letter with disdain. A military ceremony. More time, wasted on uniforms and salute. But then, perhaps realizing that his refusal would be too cruel, he sighed. "Fine, I'll go. But that doesn't change anything, Rachel. My position remains the same." On the day of the ceremony, Rachel woke up with a knot in her stomach. She put on her uniform with her usual care, making sure every detail was perfect. Marcus wore a dark suit, looking uncomfortable and reluctant. They drove to the base in silence, a silence that had become the norm between them. Upon arriving, Rachel was surprised to see how many people were present. There were at least 200 people in the auditorium, including high-ranking officers, other military personnel, and civilians. She recognized some faces from her last mission, colleagues who had served with her. An officer greeted her at the entrance, directing her to a specific seat in the front row, with Marcus beside her. She was growing increasingly confused. What was happening? Before she could ask, the lights dimmed and an admiral stepped onto the stage. Rachel recognized Admiral Richardson, one of the Navy's most decorated officers. Known for his leadership in humanitarian and combat missions, he had gray hair, impeccable posture, and eyes that seemed to see right through people. "Ladies and gentlemen, officers and guests, thank you for being here today," the Admiral began, his deep voice echoing through the auditorium. "We are gathered here to recognize extraordinary acts of courage, dedication, and humanity performed by members of our armed forces. Today in particular, we honor individuals who went above and beyond the call of duty, who risked their own lives and safety to save others, and who exemplify the highest values of the United States." Rachel felt her heart race. She looked around, trying to understand why she was there. The Admiral continued, recounting stories of bravery from different servicemen, each called to the stage to receive medals and recognition. They were moving tales of rescues under enemy fire, of leadership in critical moments, of personal sacrifice for the greater good. And then, the Admiral paused, his eyes meeting Rachel in the front row. "Our next honoree," he said, and Rachel felt the blood run cold in her veins, "is Lieutenant Rachel Matthews. Lieutenant Matthews, please join me on stage." With trembling legs, Rachel stood and walked to the stage, aware of all eyes on her, especially Marcus. She climbed the steps and stood beside the Admiral, still not fully understanding what was happening. The Admiral smiled at her, a warm and genuine smile, before turning back to the audience. Lieutenant Matthews has served for the past 6 months in one of the most dangerous regions of the Middle East, leading a medical team under extremely adverse conditions, he began. During her time there, she treated over 300 patients, both military and civilian, with a survival rate that exceeded all expectations. But it's not just her medical expertise that brings her here today. The Admiral paused dramatically, and Rachel could feel tears beginning to well up in her eyes. 3 months ago, the base where Lieutenant Matthews was stationed was attacked. A projectile hit the medical wing, causing a fire that spread rapidly. There were patients trapped inside, including 3 seriously wounded American soldiers and an Afghan family, parents and 2 children who were being treated. The order was given to evacuate so that firefighters could work without risking more lives. But Lieutenant Matthews refused to leave. Rachel closed her eyes, remembering that horrible day, the unbearable heat, the smoke burning her lungs, the screams of panic. She entered the burning building 4 times, the Admiral continued, his voice now heavy with emotion. 4 times, against direct orders from her superiors, risking her own life to extract each patient, one by one. On the last trip, part of the ceiling collapsed, briefly, trapping her under rubble. She suffered second-degree burns on her arms and back, smoke inhalation that left her hospitalized for a week. But all the patients under her care survived. All of them. The audience erupted in applause. Rachel opened her eyes, seeing through tears now flowing. She looked for Marcus in the audience and found him still seated, but his expression had completely changed. He no longer had that distant, critical look. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open, and there was something in them that she hadn't seen in months. Respect, admiration, perhaps even shame. But there's more, the Admiral said, waiting for the applause to die down. 2 weeks later, still recovering from her injuries, Lieutenant Matthews received information about a nearby village that had been hit by a chemical attack. Again, against medical advice to remain at rest, she led a response team, arriving at the village before any other help. There, she treated more than 50 civilians, mostly children, working for 36 consecutive hours without sleep, saving lives that would have been lost without her quick and courageous intervention. The Admiral turned to Rachel, holding a blue velvet box. Lieutenant Rachel Matthews, on behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, it is my honor to present you with the Silver Star for Bravery in Combat, the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism, and the Purple Heart Medal for wounds received in action. He opened the boxes one by one, revealing the gleaming medals, and then carefully pinned them to Rachel's uniform. The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Rachel could barely process what was happening. She looked at the medals on her chest, symbols of sacrifice and courage she hadn't even realized she possessed. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because it was her duty, because people needed her, because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. The Admiral embraced her, whispering in her ear, "You made your country proud, soldier. Never forget that." When Rachel stepped down from the stage, her legs were still trembling, but for different reasons now. Marcus was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and when their eyes met, she saw tears streaming down his face. He stepped forward and hugged her, pressing her against his chest in a way he hadn't done in months. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Rachel, I had no idea. You never told me. You never asked," she replied softly, without accusation, merely stating a fact. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while people around them greeted them and offered congratulations. Finally, Marcus pulled away enough to look into her eyes. "I was an idiot," he said, and there was genuine contrition in his voice. "I was so focused on what I was missing, on what I wanted, that I never stopped to really understand the difference you were making." The Admiral approached them, and Marcus immediately straightened his posture, showing instinctive respect for the superior rank. "You must be the lieutenant's husband," the Admiral said, extending his hand. "Admiral Richardson." Marcus shook his, still visibly shaken. "Marcus Matthews." "Sir, I had to know. I need to better understand what my wife did." The Admiral nodded, his gaze understanding. "Walk with me." He gestured for them to follow him to a quieter corner of the auditorium. "Mr. Matthews, I don't know what challenges you face at home, and it's not my place to interfere in personal matters. But as someone who has served for 40 years and who has been married for 35 years, I can tell you one thing. What your wife does is not for her, and certainly not for you. Marcus listened attentively, and Rachel stood quietly beside him, letting the Admiral speak. But your wife is not just an excellent officer. She is one of the best I have ever seen. The kind of person who comes along once in a generation, someone with exceptional skills and, more importantly, with the heart and courage to use them when it matters most. The lives she has saved, not just the ones I've mentioned here, but hundreds of others throughout her career, those are real lives. Families that are still complete because of her. Children who still have parents, parents who still have children. The Admiral paused, letting the words sink in. I understand the sacrifice you're making. I know it's not fair that you didn't sign up for it the same way she did, but what I'm asking you is to consider the bigger picture. What would it mean for the world to lose someone like Lieutenant Matthews, someone who can and will make a tremendous difference? I'm not saying your marriage should be sacrificed, but I'm asking you to find a way to support her, to be part of this journey instead of fighting against it. Marcus remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. Then he looked at Rachel, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in months. He saw the scars she hid beneath her uniform, the determination in her eyes, the strength that had always been there but that he had chosen to ignore. I was selfish, he finally said, not to the Admiral, but to Rachel. I made it all about myself, about what I was losing, without ever considering what you were gaining, what you were giving to the world. Rachel took his hand, squeezing it gently. I've made mistakes too. I shut myself off. I stopped sharing with you because I thought you didn't want to hear. We both let the distance grow. The Admiral smiled, satisfied. Well, I'll leave you two to talk. Lieutenant Matthews, congratulations again. And Mr. Matthews, I hope you find your way together. It's worth fighting for. He withdrew, leaving the couple alone. In the weeks that followed, Rachel and Marcus began to rebuild their marriage. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. They started couples therapy, this time with Marcus truly engaged, really trying to understand. Rachel also did her part, learning to open up more, to share not only the difficulties but also the victories, to let Marcus into her military life in ways she hadn't allowed before. They established new routines, new ways to connect even when physical distance separated them. Marcus began attending support groups for military spouses, where he met others facing similar challenges. Hearing their stories and learning how others made it work gave him perspective and tools he hadn't had before. He also started volunteering with an organization that supported veterans, finding his own way to serve, his own purpose that complemented Rachel's instead of competing with it. Slowly, the house that had become cold and silent began to fill with warmth and laughter again. Rachel continued her career in the Navy, but now with Marcus truly by her side. When she left for her next mission, 6 months after the ceremony, it was different. They said goodbye with love and mutual understanding, with concrete plans to communicate, with hope instead of resentment. And when she returned, Marcus was there, waiting with flowers, with a genuine smile, ready to listen to her stories, to celebrate her victories, to support her in her struggles. Years later, when people asked Marcus how he coped with having a military wife, he always recounted that day in the auditorium, about the Admiral who showed him what it truly meant to serve, about the medals on his wife's chest that represented lives saved and a difference made. He told how he almost lost the most incredible woman he had ever known because he was so focused on his own needs that he forgot to see the heroism right in front of him. And he always ended by saying that the greatest pride of his life was not his own career or achievements, but being married to someone like Lieutenant, now Commander, Rachel Matthews, a true American heroine. Rachel's life after that transformative ceremony took on new dimensions she had never imagined. In the following months, while working on administrative tasks at the San Diego base before her next deployment, she discovered that the medals on her chest carried an unexpected weight. Not just the physical weight of the medal, but the weight of the responsibility and expectation that came with them. Other service members looked at her with renewed admiration, young recruits sought her advice, and superiors began to involve her in projects of greater strategic importance. Marcus also changed in ways that surprised them both. He began researching extensively about military operations in the Middle East, not to criticize or question, but to genuinely understand the context in which Rachel worked. He bought books on the history of the region, watched documentaries about modern conflicts, and for the first time, truly grasped the complexity and necessity of the American military presence in certain areas. On the nights they dined together, the conversations changed dramatically. Previously dominated by heavy silences or discussions about household chores, they were now filled with meaningful exchanges about geopolitics, ethical dilemmas in conflict zones, and the unique challenges medical professionals faced in combat environments. One particularly memorable night, about 3 months after the ceremony, Marcus prepared a special dinner. He lit candles, cooked Rachel's favorite dish, and, when she arrived home after a long day of training, she found the table set with a care she hadn't seen in a long time. During dinner, he held her hand and said something that instantly brought tears to her eyes. "I spent so much time trying to make you be who I needed you to be, that I never stopped to appreciate who you truly are. And Rachel, who you are, is absolutely extraordinary. I'm so sorry for almost destroying that." Rachel squeezed his hand back, her voice choked with emotion as she replied, "We both made mistakes. I also stopped trying to include you, to make you feel part of my journey. I thought it would be easier to keep those parts of my life separate, but it only created distance between us." They talked late into the night, sharing fears and hopes they had long held on to. Marcus admitted that part of his anger stemmed from the constant fear of losing Rachel, not just to geographical distance, but permanently to some mission that went terribly wrong. Rachel, in turn, confessed that she sometimes felt torn between two worlds, never fully present in either, always feeling like she was failing in some aspect of her life. It was Marcus who suggested a creative solution. What if I could be more involved? Not in operations, of course, but in support. There are organizations that work with military families, providing resources and support during deployments. I could work with them, maybe even create something new. Rachel was surprised and touched by the idea. She had assumed that Marcus would always see the military as something external, something that competed for his attention. But here he was, proposing not only to accept this part of his life, but to actively participate in it in a meaningful way. In the following months, Marcus immersed himself in this new project with a passion that Rachel hadn't seen in him for years. He connected with other military families, listened to their stories, and identified gaps in existing support systems. He discovered that many spouses, especially those without military experience of their own, felt isolated and uninformed during their partner's deployment. There weren't enough resources to help them understand what their loved ones were experiencing or how best to support them during and after difficult missions. Marcus began developing workshops and support groups, using his own experience of nearly losing his marriage as a starting point for honest conversations about the real challenges military families face. Rachel watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and relief. The man who had given her an ultimatum, who had threatened divorce if she didn't abandon her career, was now building an organization to support other military couples. It was as if the ceremony and the Admiral's words had planted a seed that was finally blossoming. She began collaborating with Marcus on his project, offering perspectives from the military side, helping to create educational material that were both informative and sensitive to operational realities. When the time came for her next deployment, scheduled for 9 months after the ceremony, the farewell was radically different. At the airport, Marcus hugged her tightly, but there was no resentment in his touch, only genuine love and concern. "Come back to me," he whispered in her ear. "And while you're there, save as many lives as you can. Do the incredible work that only you can do. I'll be here, supporting you in every way possible," Rachel cried, but there were tears of gratitude, not guilt or She left knowing she had a true partner back home, someone who understood and valued her mission. The new deployment took Rachel to a coastal region where naval operations combined with humanitarian efforts. Her reputation had grown, and she was assigned as chief medical officer of a task force working on both combat missions and reconstruction initiatives. The work was as challenging as before, perhaps even more. But this time, Rachel kept Marcus fully informed, within the limits of operational safety. They developed a communication routine, video calls when possible, daily messages, even if brief, sharing not only the practical aspects of their lives, but also their feelings and reflections. Marcus, for his part, shared updates on his project, which had grown much faster than anyone had expected. He had secured funding from veterans organizations, established partnerships with the Navy, and his workshops were helping hundreds of families. Rachel listened to his stories with growing admiration, realizing that Marcus had found his own way to serve, his own mission that was just as important as hers, only different. He was saving marriages, strengthening families, creating support networks that would make a difference for generations. There were difficult moments, of course. One particularly dangerous operation where Rachel and her team were under enemy fire for hours, treating the wounded while projectiles hit the perimeter. She couldn't speak to Marcus for 4 days, and when she finally could, her voice was heavy with tension and exhaustion. Marcus listened, not trying to minimize or resolve things, just being there, offering the emotional support she needed. "You're the strongest person I know," he said softly. "And I'm here. I'll always be, no matter how hard it gets." When Rachel finally returned from that deployment 6 months later, Marcus was waiting at the airport with a sign that simply read, "My hero." Rachel laughed and cried at the same time, running into his arms. They drove home, not in silence, but chatting excitedly, planning a trip they had postponed for years, talking about the future with renewed hope. The house, when they arrived, was decorated with welcome banners, photos of both of them in their respective work areas, a visual testament to their partnership in complementary missions. That night, lying in the bed they had shared for years, but which had only recently begun to feel like a refuge again, Rachel turned to Marcus. "I'll keep serving, right? Probably for many more years. There will be more deployments, more farewells." Marcus nodded, running his fingers through her hair. "I know. And I'll be here, supporting you, proud of you, building my own ... create a life and mission while you build your own. We're going to make this work, Rachel. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Because you're worth it."